So this is by far the largest group of philosophically, ethically interested people I've ever been with. I run a group myself, and usually, if 8 people show up, that's like pretty big. So it's going to be interesting to try to have these conversations with such a large group. This is actually going to be very participatory. I really want all of you to engage in these questions. I think, Catherine, that was very flattering, but there is one thing I will say: I'm going to try to make you uncomfortable today. That is true. So first, I think it's only fair to explain to you how I sort of came to this. And so for me, philosophy really came into my life later. So I work for Google, I teach computer science. These are fields where you can be very comfortable in your empirical knowledge, right? You can say, I can say to my students, this is how you write a program. This is what will happen. If you do this, it'll be fast. If you do this, it'll be slow. And they might disagree. They might say, no, I think you're wrong. I think this other thing. But then they'll go do it, and the computer will not listen to them. And they'll come back to me, and they'll say, oh, you were right. Philosophy doesn't work that way. So the other night, where's David? He's here. There he is. So David and I were our friends, and we were talking, and I was, I'm nervous about this, and I sort of wondered, what we get out of it. And we reached a point in the conversation where I said, it'd be great if people come away with this sort of knowing how to deal with the ethics of everyday lives. And a lot of philosophy problems, the thought experiments that we'll go through, they're not ones that you will ever probably face. One of the first ones we'll look at, and some of you might be familiar with it because it tends to be a problem that you encounter in an introductory philosophy class, which many of you probably had to take in undergrad or maybe in business school, something like that. Something like, what would you do if there was a runaway train that was about to hit a bunch of people, something like that, right? This is one of the early thought experiments that people go through. And we will go through it, and we'll talk about it. But I'd be shocked if any of you ever encounter that situation. None of you, I think, are conductors and probably don't hang out near train tracks. And even if you do, dear God, I hope there are no switches where you can actually flip them and direct the train in one direction or another, which is all necessary for this particular thought experiment. But what are the ethical dilemmas that you face typically? So we have this advantage here that you don't have when you're reading books, and certainly when you're reading books that were written 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago, which is we live in New York. We all face a similar set of problems. One thing that occurred to me as I started to try to apply the stuff that I was reading to my day-to-day life was that actually, if you go through your day asking yourself and trying to be aware of ethical questions, acutely aware, you will find that you actually sometimes don't go for more than 5 minutes without making an ethical decision. I actually made one who was it downstairs? Yes, we were downstairs when we entered the building, right? And the two of you were right in front of me, and I walked up, and you were waiting. They were like having trouble finding your name downstairs, right? And do you remember what I did? Yeah, I said, I interrupted her and said, I know you're searching for their names. I'm the speaker, let me go up. It might seem trivial, but this was actually a moral question. Is this right? Do I have a right to go? They were here first. It's not starting for at least 10 minutes. I will get up there in time, but on what basis can I actually go ahead of them? I know I can pull it off. I did. Right? I did. I got up here before you. Well, actually, then I ended up holding the elevator for you. So this is kind of, it worked out. But one of the things that I'll sort of touch upon again and again throughout these conversations is that these big questions of homelessness and justice and abortion and immigration, we debate these ad nauseum, and we are very impassioned, and we should be. These things are really important. But one of the things that one of the arguments I'm going to try to make to you today as we have these conversations is that I actually don't think that you can get too far in these questions if you don't actually practice the craft of ethics in your day-to-day life. And for most of us, myself included, I don't work in government. I don't affect a lot of these things. I'm not a judge. So the areas in which I might challenge myself are not as dramatic. They're not going to be things that we talk about in philosophy classes. But they are the things that will lead to my development of my own character. And that's why this is so important to me. So let's talk about what ethics is first. It really tries to answer two questions, right? It tries to answer what is the best way for people to live. I'm going to do this a lot as if I'm going to write on the board, but the board actually, it doesn't work, it turns out. I'm sorry to totally bust you on this, but it's, the chalk is like, doesn't come off. So I have a ghost of, I'm used to teaching with a board, so forgive me if that's awkward. So ethics really asks us two questions, right? The first is, what is the best way for people to live? And what are the right, or what actions are right or wrong in particular circumstances, right? So I was downstairs, I had to decide if this is right or wrong to cut ahead to try to get upstairs. Now, I can tell you not only that everyone in this room loves ethics, everyone loves ethics. They might not know it, but they do. So I don't watch Netflix, I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm like a really weird guy. There's just, yes, I take the books on the vacation, it's awkward. But I did watch, the other day, the first episode of House of Cards. Is that right? Yeah, it's called House of Cards. Yeah, thank you. And does, I mean, I don't even know how long it's been on, but there's the opening scene. Does anyone remember what the opening scene is with Kevin Spacey? You're nodding. Do you remember what the opening scene is? The dog, yes. There's a dog was hit by a car. That was the incident, and then he comes upon it, and the camera zooms in on his face, and he gives this little speech. We don't see the dog; it's whimpering off in the background, trying to trigger all of our emotions. And the whimpering dog, and he goes, there are two kinds of pain. There's a pain, I don't remember it verbatim, but there's the pain that strengthens you, and then there's useless pain. And he says, I have no patience for useless things. And then he kills the dog. And you don't see it, the dog just dies. So one of the things that I want to encourage us to do is to try to approach all of these problems from a place not of, you're going to occasionally have emotional responses to the choices that people say they would make in all of these thought experiments. You're human, you should have those emotional responses. But one of the things that distinguishes philosophy from just people ranting in the street and yelling at each other, or Facebook, which is the new form of ranting on the street, is that we sort of agree to a certain set of principles. One of them is that in the spirit of John Stuart Mill, he wrote On Liberty, which I'll talk about later, fantastic defense of free speech. And one of the things is that you actually don't have, as it turns out, any basis upon which to believe that your opinion is the correct one. This is one of the reasons we have free speech. It's not just so that we can feel good about being able to say whatever we want. It is because actually, what we know is that over time, over our history as a species, we've gotten a lot of things wrong, and we've really, really believed the wrong thing. Really, to the point where we've killed each other over that. We believe that we are good people, the others are bad. There's no way the earth isn't flat. There's no way that the sun revolves around us. There's no way God doesn't exist, all of these things. And so in this class, I want us to try to sort of maintain that spirit. So consider all opinions valid. And try to engage with, I would advise you to try to engage with them in a way that where you, in a spirit of collaboration, right? This is one of the things that's different. If you're trying to win an argument, then you yell at someone. If you're trying to get at the truth, then you collaborate with them, right? You ask questions. So one of the things that's always sort of interesting to me about thought experiments, and I've just basically taken something that was very visceral for me because, and for those of you who watched it and remember it, because you see his face, he has a tone of voice, he has a very cold demeanor. He's meant to be, he's sort of portraying, in that moment at least, I don't know the rest of the show, I haven't seen it, but in that moment he strikes me as a pretty calculating individual. And I can infer that because one of the things that we're really good at as human beings is is things like that, is inferring things from tone of voice and posture and all these things. So all of you are describing things, and you might be imagining slightly different variations of that situation when you do it. So I'm going to let the dog thing lie for a sorry, no pun intended. That was really not intentional. But that was just a little seed to get us started. But the reason that I brought up specifically something like House of Cards is because I wanted to justify my statement that everyone loves ethics. So when we walk around in the world, we think there's truth. We think that things, we have stories in our head, right? We have a narrative about what we're doing and why we're doing it and where we've been and our motivations and who's good to us and who's bad and who's a good person and who's a bad person. But if you really think about the facts of day-to-day life, they're not actually like that. So I lived with a girlfriend once, and occasionally she would cook, and she would, and which I was very grateful for. But the caps on whatever she used, she would leave them on but not screw them back on, which would drive me crazy because I would go to put something away and it would spill, the cap would fall off. And I'd be like, ah. And when things were going well, when I felt when for all the reasons that we understand, relationships are going well, I said, oh, that's so cute. That's adorable. You just leave it, you're silly. And then when we weren't doing so well, it's funny because reality didn't change. What is the reality? The reality was food, she prepared food, bottles were there, caps were on them, right? And they were not screwed on. Those are facts. Those are empirical facts. There's a whole field of philosophy that actually talks about whether or not whether that's even true, but this is ethics, so we're going to assume that's true. Reality, we experience it collectively, it's a real thing. But yet my truth, the narrative in my head that I so believed at one point, when it was convenient for me, I changed to something completely different. And what it changed to was, she never finished anything. I should have known. I should have seen it with the caps on the food in the kitchen. Oh my God, how did I not see it coming? And so neither of those are actually, all of that is me making stuff up and imposing it on a situation. And that's a lot of that is ethics. A lot of that is saying, okay, there are facts in life and I have to make choices and I need to impose semantics on top of those facts and create stories and then use those stories to make decisions. That's what we do. You do it all day long. You're talking to yourself all day long. You're walking through the street right now. It's very quiet in here. I'm the only one speaking, but that's not true. There are 50 conversations in this room right now. Each of you is having a conversation in your head. Some of you might not be having a conversation that's at all related to what I'm talking about. You might be having a conversation with yourself about something else entirely. And that's okay. But the point is that everyone loves ethics because it's part of what makes us human. Unlike the other areas of philosophy are more abstract, but this is really part of what we do. Before we get into some more thought experiments, I want to frame this a little bit more as to why it is that we're going to do this, right? What's the point? I mean, it's kind of fun to sit around and be like, oh, well, what would I do if a train? I don't know, it's crazy. But there's actually something else that I came to, which was one of the reasons that I turned to philosophy. And it's this. I and probably everyone in this room, you sort of grow up with this idea in a liberal society. You go to a good school, you get good grades, and you think, well, I'm going to study and I'm going to learn and I'm going to develop my intellect. And my intellect is going to help me be a good person. And I make this argument to you, that's not true. In fact, I think that one of the most dangerous things is to develop. I so much prefer a dumb person with bad morals to a brilliant person with bad morals. Right? So this idea that if you think about what your intellect, what your reason is, and philosophers do this a lot, and we're going to get into it, they talk about reason. They talk about passion and reason, going all the way back to Aristotle. There was this debate of whether or not, who's in charge? Is it reason or is it passion? Who do we want to be in charge? Should reason be the slave of passion? or should passion be the slave of reason? Should we want the things that we decide we want, or should we seek the things that our passion says that we want to begin with? Now, if you have a very well-developed intellect, if your reason works really well, if you've honed that over years, then what it is perched atop your shoulder. And you might have a feeling, and then reason will be that friend, that dutiful lawyer that comes in and says, oh yeah, and I'll give you a great defense for that. That's what happens. We decide things. We decide that we like people. We decide that people are motivated by certain reasons. We decide that something makes sense or doesn't make sense. We make political choices. We decide that our girlfriends finish things or don't finish things. And the little guy or girl or per thing, whatever this is, reason, who's sitting here, comes in and says, yeah, you're so right. Everything you feel right now is right. And I'm going to explain why. And I'm going to give you a whole big argument to back that up. So for me, it was this question of, I felt like I had done a pretty good job of developing my ability to reason, and what I wanted to do was come back and say, okay, but on what basis does reason come to the conclusions that it comes to when I try to make an argument? And all of us at this point, actually, this is when now that we have Facebook, I mean, there's just no better experience, there's no better place to go to try to see people work this stuff out. That is exactly a place where mostly people come in, and then the little reason comes in and starts to defend the position they had before the conversation even started, and certainly doesn't change in the course of the conversation. So that was really what I wanted to do, and I'll say this to those of you who are religious. One of the things that I discovered over time was that I was never a religious person particularly. I was raised religious, but I went away from it. It really did give me a little bit of an appreciation. I'm not big on some of the stories, but there is something to be said, and we will see parallels between religion and some of the forms of Western philosophy. It gives you a little bit of that, at least a very simple idea. For example, someone might not have any question about whether they should kill this dog because it is just something that's forbidden. And there is clarity in that, even though you might wonder, what is this based on? Which is the reason many people actually turn away from religion and turn to other things. So before we're going to get into another thought experiment, but I'm going to tell you that I have figured out what philosophy is and what it isn't, and you're not going to walk away from here with all the answers. I'm sorry. You're not going to walk away from here knowing what you should and shouldn't do. A good analogy for me is ethics will not tell you what you should and shouldn't do any more than studying art will tell you what you should paint. That's not how it works, right? You don't say, oh God, I want to paint. I want to know what the best painting I should paint is. And so you go and you take art and you figure it out. You say, yes, I figured it out. I'm done. Right? That's obviously not how it works. So there are a few things I hope that you walk away from this conversation with. One is we're going to do philosophy, so you're going to understand what it is to actually do philosophy. It's a little bit different from just reading and studying, so we're going to do that. I would like for you to walk away from here having a better understanding of how emotion and reason sort of play together, and it's very hard to tease them apart. Emotion will affect your reason, and in fact, we're going to get to an experiment that was done where we can see how that happens. And reason obviously affects emotion, and they're very intertwined. And I would like for you to walk away understanding that. But mostly I would like for you to walk away from here with a greater sense of awareness of when these questions come up. Because the thing that really I think most of us do, and I still do this, it's very hard not to, is that you walk around throughout your day not realizing that you are making ethical choices all the time. And that those ethical choices affect your character and the depth of experience in your life. And that also means that what you're not going to get out of here, there was, in the description, the original description for this class, there was some part in there, and I wrote it, so it's my fault, but there was a part in there about being ethical is really important for like business. It's important for your relationships and trust with your. There was some, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it was something that was very related to business. That's actually not a good reason to do this. It is not meant to get you to happiness. It is not meant to get you to wealth. In fact, I can tell you for sure that if you choose to develop an awareness of these questions, you will have less money than you would otherwise. You will. I'm sorry. That's a choice you're going to have to make. You will be less happy. If I had chosen to wait in line like I probably should have, I would not have gotten here as quickly, and maybe I would have been slightly less happy. I don't know. All of these questions, you may not get on the crowded subway car that's packed because you say, you know what? And right now we're just speaking, and mostly I'm speaking, but we're going to get into specific reasons why you would choose to do that. You might say, oh, well, Kant says it's not universalizable, or there's a utilitarian argument for this, and so on. That helps me. Yeah, but really I just feel like this is wrong. I'm not going to get on the subway car. And you might be late to an appointment, right? So your life will not be maximized in the way that we have mostly been trained, particularly in a capitalist society, to try to maximize our lives. But in particular, Aristotle would say you are living a better life, and you are being a better human. Aristotle and Kant both would agree with that. I want us to move on to our next sort of thought experiment. This is the one I hinted at earlier that has to do with the train. So, and those of you who have heard this before, I apologize, we'll get to other ones shortly. But you are the conductor of a train. The train is, suddenly the brakes don't work. You're barreling down the tracks, and you see ahead of you a fork. You can choose to turn the train off the fork. Directly in front of you are 5 people tied up, unable to move, laying on the tracks, and off to the side, if you were to, the side track, there's one person tied up, unable to move on the track. If you do nothing, presumably, you will kill these 5, the train will kill these 5 people, and if you decide to act, you can turn the train as the conductor, you just can't stop it, and it will kill the one. So, just take a second to think about this, and I'd be curious to get a show of hands. How many of you think that you would, or that you should, let's say that you should turn the train onto the one track? Raise them high, don't be shy. Okay. So how many of you would not turn the train at that point? Wow, okay, no one. Let me change now the problem a bit, because presumably, so actually let's do what philosophers do, right? I promised you this, that you would learn how we're doing philosophy. So you don't just sit around and go, I would do that, and then you go and get a cappuccino. Like that's not philosophy. So philosophy is that's what we do as humans, I guess. But like, excuse me, philosophy is about a particular process. So the way it works is that you in the case of a thought experiment, you imagine a particular situation. You usually decide on, you make a judgment. You say, well, I think, you try your best to imagine yourself in that situation. Often it is imperfect, and some of you tried to make it more perfect, but it's imperfect because this is a very calm space. I actually thought of doing this, and then I decided it would be potentially bad, but I wanted to play a sound of a train oncoming and people screaming, because that's what would happen, right? You'd be people are tied up and they're screaming and the train's coming, it's loud and it's so scary, and all of your emotions are going to cloud everything that you do. But when you are faced with a thought experiment, that's not how it works. And that's how we play the game, philosophers. So you make a judgment, and then you say, okay, I've made my judgment. And that judgment seems to me to indicate that I believe in a certain principle. I struggled with this too, and I actually spoke to a philosophy professor about it at some point, and I said, I'm really tired of these thought experiments. None of them are real. This is annoying. I go through day to day, and every time I face something, and granted, it's not the trolley problem, but there are all these other things. I look at a person, and I say, how do I feel? The way this is terrible, but we're human, right? And you look at someone and you just have a feeling about them, and you kind of feel sometimes like you want to help someone, and sometimes you kind of feel like, I don't want to help you. And that's terrible, but it's true. And so all of these other things that are really, really complicated about the way that we communicate, a sort of nonverbal communication, stereotypes, biases, all these things come into play. So why go through a thought experiment? Why does it even make sense to eliminate all of that stuff and live in make-believe and try to come to some conclusion? And the reason is that if you can come up with a plausible principle that can back up a judgment in a series of scenarios, and you might play with certain scenarios to discover your biases, then it might be the case that you have to then take, if you want to be honest with yourself, take that principle and apply it in the world in a way that undermines your bias. Right? So the whole idea is that the world is messy, and I'm going to just do things because I feel like it because I'm biased and I'm imperfect. But maybe I can do better if I eliminate all of that stuff, start with something that's totally make-believe, but fine. I'm faced with this scenario I'm never going to be faced with, but what do I think I would do? OK, that seems right to me. Let me take that principle. Well, now if I change it this way, excuse me, maybe I'm American. You know, it's one American on one track, and I don't know, 5 Iraqis on the other, or you know, whatever is in the news or whatever it is that's emotionally charged. Just take that, or whatever you think your emotional bias is, or your family members. Put, you know, it's your brother on one track, and 5 strangers on the other. I don't even have to ask you, I think, what all of you would do in this case. So this principle suddenly goes out the window, and you go, wait a minute. Viewed from the perspective of I'm going to kill my brother over strangers, we find it maybe, some people might find it distasteful. But viewed from the perspective of that I owe as much to my fellow human being in charity and help, generosity, than I do to someone whom I work with, who's close to me, or maybe even who's a family member, that might seem more palatable. So it depends on what you value. And then you bring up a very interesting other side of it, which is that even on the basis of sort of a calculation of value, you might decide that your brother, because you have some knowledge about that, you might say, well, you know, my brother runs a nonprofit and volunteers, and he's working on a cure for cancer, and he's almost got it, and like, this would be bad. So the process of philosophy hinges on us iterating on this in a particular way. So first, we decide what we're going to do. And then we come out of that, we make a judgment about what we're going to do, and we try to derive a principle from that. And then we modify the thought experiment and retest the principle. This is sort of a very post-Enlightenment way of doing philosophy. Aristotle didn't really do this. Socratic, the sort of Socratic method gets at this a little bit, but this is more iterative and scientific. So, although science is very different from philosophy. Sorry, I didn't mean to conflate the two. So now we're going to take this and we're going to change it a little bit. You're not the conductor anymore, you're a bystander. And as a bystander, there's a switch that's in front of you. It's very clear what the switch does, and it flips the train. And you see the train coming, barreling down from your left. And on the right-hand side, you have your 2 choices. Same scenario as we originally had. As far as you know, strangers look approximately the same, the 1 versus the 5. Do you flip the switch, or do you not? Do you just let the train continue on, knowing that it's going to probably kill the 5? How many of you would just let the train continue on? Because everyone flipped the switch earlier, right? Everyone in the conductor, we turned it. So now we're going to say we're on the side. How many of you would just say, yeah, I'm not doing anything?
Is the conductor on the train, or no?
You don't know. For the sake of the thought experiment, I think you should assume that there isn't. Yeah.
So again, it's
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's never actually stated explicitly, but I would the implication in all of the writings about this is that you're the only person making a decision. So assume it's a broken down self-driving train that you saw in the news. There's no driver. It's really terrible. You just happen to be at the worst possible spot in the worst possible time, and so now you've got this choice.
Are you there alone, or are there other people?
You're there alone. So sorry, let me be clear. So how many of you would flip the switch? Okay, so you would say flipping the switch saves the 5 and kills the 1, right? So that's how everyone understood it.
Flipping the switch kills the 5, but that staying on this track kills the 5.
Sorry, did I say it wrong? Staying on the track, it is staying on the track. If you flip the switch, you're going to flip it to the side track. If you do nothing, it stays on the track and kills the 5. If you flip the switch, you've saved effectively the 5, but you've killed the 1.
Can you derail the train?
There's nothing else you can do. Your hand is duct taped to the switch and you are tied down. It's a really weird version of Saw. I did see that movie. It's like that. It might not, to literally answer your question, it's different in the sense that I'm not the conductor. I am a person who has no involvement, no responsibility whatsoever, generally speaking, right? It does, empirically in studies, this does make a difference to some people. Some people take into account in their sort of calculation or in their emotions about it, this feeling that I am responsible for this train and where it goes. And so being the conductor when they put themselves in that situation, for some of them says, well, I have been tasked with, it is my job to turn this train. It is my job to stop the train. It is my job to do all these things. I'm responsible for the train. Therefore, for some people affects what they do, whereas coming upon something that you never contracted to be a part of, right? Either literally signing a contract or even some, informally said that, oh yeah, sure, I'll stand and watch trains here. It'll be my job. It's just you're taking a walk and this thing just comes upon you. For some people, that's a reason to say, not my problem. So it sounds like everyone is pretty much still comfortable with remember, we made a judgment. We derived from that judgment a principle. The principle was effectively that we cared. We were weighing lives. And it seems like that principle stands, right? Nothing has changed for all. I don't think a single person has changed their perspective. So I'm gonna take us to the next variation to try to keep testing this principle. Now you're no longer the conductor. You're no longer the bystander. You are standing atop a bridge. The train tracks go under the bridge. It's like a footbridge. And this is kind of weird, but this is the classic thought experiment. This is the way it is. You are standing next to a very large fat man. Bear with me. You're standing next to a very large fat man, and this train is oncoming, and there's no sidetrack this time. Ahead of you, there are 5 people tied, unable to move. The train is going to kill them. And assume that this man is so large and the train is a trolley or something that's reasonably small that you believe pretty surely that if you push this man off the footbridge in front of the train, it will stop the train. You will save those 5 people and probably kill the fat man. So now the question is, remember, the going back, trying to be sort of intentional and methodical about this, the principle we had was that I should always try to save the 5 at the expense of the 1. The brother thing introduced a wrinkle for most of us. And so now we need to test this against this. He's a stranger. This fat man is a stranger. How many of you would push a fat man to his death to save 5 lives? I want to see all the, yeah? Okay, how many of you would not? Okay, good. This challenges our principle. This is actually a perfect point I want to illustrate something that happens a lot. We made a judgment, we developed a principle, we're testing that principle over and over again. Both of you, the principle still stands, right? For both of you. You'd still push. There's nothing left. So the interesting thing now, aside from you can sort of take 2 different mindsets.
I have a question. Could you jump yourself, or you're not fat?
No, you can't. You can't. No, you're tied. I don't know. You're tied to the footbridge somehow. It wouldn't even work. There are 2 mindsets that you can take in this approach. One is to say, I'm going to keep on trying to prove my point, and the other is to say, wait a minute. There are some people in the room for whom the principle no longer stands, and we need to figure that out, right? So this is what I want to encourage. This is the little twist that, this will change how you debate with people. This changes what you post on Facebook or how you respond to people. This is a different mindset where you say, hold on, I totally disagree with you, but tell me more. This is generally how. This is not unusual. This is exactly how things start to go in these thought experiments. In this particular one. And people start out with, my chalkboard. What you all did initially is the principle that you based your judgment on was a utilitarian principle. So utilitarianism was formulated by Jeremy Bentham originally in Principles of Morals and Legislation, and he made the argument that the right thing to do is to maximize, it's the greatest good for the greatest number. And he was so dogmatic, he was so extreme about it that he believed that you could calculate that there was an actual, he sort of imagined an element that represented pleasure, and you could add them up, right? And so there's no such thing as saying that what you value, what's pleasurable to you and what's pleasurable to me is sort of intrinsically better or worse. It is just maybe if we make a certain decision, 5 people will be saved, 1 person will die. That is what we should do. Utilitarianism appeals a lot to, I was a utilitarian actually for a long time. It appeals to people who like to work with numbers and who don't, who have a particular affinity for relativism in certain, so say, like, who are you to say that this thing is better than this other thing? That might be true for you, but for me, you like to read Shakespeare, I like to watch Simpsons, I like to watch, he likes to watch WWF, whatever it is, and who are we to judge? And so the idea is, according to Bentham, the idea is that, well, we don't know, and so what we should do is everyone knows for him or herself what they like and what they don't like, and so we'll add all of that up, and we'll calculate it, and we'll figure it out. And so that was the basis upon which many of you made your earlier calculation. The first time we really deviated from that was your perception. And you said, I think the moment, it was because you're murdering someone, right? And that's wrong, right? And a utilitarian would say, well, why is it wrong? And you would probably, I presume, just say, well, just because it's wrong. One of the appeals of utilitarianism is that it makes absolutely no judgment. The actual tenets of utilitarianism, if clubbing baby seals gives you the greatest pleasure in the world, and other people, and someone else is in the room, and they don't care either way, then you should club baby seals. Like there's no, so the idea that something it makes you feel guilty or feel selfish or whatever it is, that's all valid. That's part of playing. Now, I'm not taking a stand on clubbing baby seals. Let me just be clear. I am taking a stand on it. Don't club baby seals. Actually, just I feel like there's some weird trolley problem with baby seals now that someone has to do. But no, my point is, and tell me if I'm not addressing your question, but that if whatever you're feeling is precisely the thing that is to be measured. So there's no judgment about the value of one feeling over another, right? Sort of sociopathic feelings on the utilitarian principle are just as valuable as altruistic. I feel really good because I did something that was good in the world. At least as far as Bentham is concerned. Actually, John Stuart Mill, Bentham had a disciple, James Mill. James Mill had a son, John Stuart Mill. This sounds like, this is an interesting parenting scenario. John Stuart Mill was raised, I think he knew Greek by age 3, Latin by age 8, and he wrote a history of Roman law at the age of 11. And then he had a nervous breakdown at the age of 20. So that's John Stuart Mill. And you can actually, he wrote an autobiography, which I encourage you to read. It's pretty interesting. But he came out of, it's actually a very nice story. He came out of his depression. He met Harriet, who was married, but she was sort of an intellectual peer of his. And for, I think, 21 years, they were just friends. And then, her husband passed away, and then they married, John Stuart Mill and Harriet. And so the other thing that John Stuart Mill is actually just one of my personal, I love John Stuart Mill. Who doesn't love someone who's just like had a parent like that? You're just like, I'm so sorry, that's brutal. But that aside, he went on to write some really important things. First, Obviously, he was raised on this idea of utilitarianism. His dad was a disciple of Jeremy Bentham himself, so he believed very deeply in utilitarianism. But then he realized that utilitarianism was susceptible to this problem, which some of you have touched on already, which is that you can't distinguish between that all pleasures are equal, and he believed actually that they kind of aren't. But he wrote an essay called Utilitarianism. It's like 90 pages, but he calls it an essay. And he argues that actually some pleasures are better than others, but on utilitarian principles. So he says that if you were to take a bunch of people who had the experience of going and seeing Shakespeare and understanding Shakespeare, and you took all those same people and you took them to see WWF, and they had those experiences, and the majority of them would always want to go see Shakespeare, then Shakespeare is the higher value thing. Not because you showed up ahead of time and said, it just is. It has to be, for him, based on this sort of empirical thing, which is that more people with enough experience and knowledge would prefer that, so therefore that thing has more value. So he wrote that in Utilitarianism. I'll digress a little bit from our thought experiments just to give you a little more history on him, because I think it's worth it. He wrote On Liberty, which is probably one of the most important books I've personally ever read. It is the greatest defense of free speech and freedom of thought. And it will, it's a lot of philosophy is very difficult to read. On Liberty is not. It's kind of oldish English, but it's totally quotable and brilliant. And in it, he makes a lot of arguments for free speech that go beyond, like I said before, just letting people say what they want to say on the basis of wanting people to feel like they can say what they want to say. He actually thinks that there are a lot of really, really good grounded reasons for free speech that go beyond that. And we can get into that, but it deviates from this a little bit. And then he also wrote On the Subjection of Women. This was one of the earliest feminists, and he tried to get women the right to vote in the mid-1800s. He was a politician, and he failed. But he wrote On the Subjection of Women, which is an impassioned defense of the equality of the genders. So he's a fantastic human being, just absolutely. Now, he is a utilitarian, was a utilitarian, and so he would say that these things are actually not equivalent. But based on, still, he does not ever say that things in and of themselves have intrinsic value, only that they have value based on some other data, let's say. So you are a surgeon, and you work at a hospital, and in this hospital you have 5 patients. They each need a different organ. Someone needs a heart, someone needs a liver, someone needs a lung, someone needs a pancreas, whatever it is. You've got the 5. And in walks, I don't know, he's kind of lost, or I don't know, he's looking for directions, whatever it is. Perfectly healthy adult. And you say, I'm a utilitarian. It's 5 organs, 1 life, 5 lives. You know what I can do? I can kill this guy. And I can transplant the organs, and I can save these 5 people. But what would you do is the question I really want to know. And then, of course, I'm going to ask you, why? The philosophy is really, ethics, I should say specifically, is very much based on those things. And so the sort of dialectic between your reason and the judgments that you make, which often involve your feelings, and very important as a part of this process, which is what we're doing here, but I haven't called it out specifically, you cannot do ethics alone. You can do thought experiments alone, but it turns out that you actually have to involve other people because they will bring other values into the equation, which will challenge your principles if you tend to agree with them. So it's actually a very social thing. It's okay to be selfish for this. You can say that you're. I don't want anyone to feel like something that feels. What I would encourage you to do is to say, when you have something, a judgment that feels selfish, to ask yourself if it is purely if it's a matter of bias, or if it's a matter of a selfishness that reflects something that should be generalizable. That says, well, okay, I don't want to carve someone up Does that reflect something that sort of, and I believe that no one should want to carve anyone up, and I believe that no one would want to carve anyone up. So what we've gotten onto is one of the major challenges to utilitarianism, which started out with Kant, and Kant wrote a couple of years after Jeremy Bentham published his Principle of Morals. Kant came out with what many consider to be just a devastating attack against utilitarianism. Unfortunately, Kant is very hard to understand. But Kant's principles ended up very much aligned. He didn't really do a lot of political theory. He wrote a lot of ethics and sort of other philosophical works. But eventually, sort of our modern notion of this is the idea of rights. And for most of us, while it might be possible to come up with an explanation of rights that is aligned with a utilitarian calculation of some sort, and say, well, rights make sense because everyone's happier when we have rights. Okay, but I don't think that's there is for many people at least, and certainly a lot of philosophers, the idea that there is a notion of dignity, of freedom, of agency, that there are some things that are important in and of themselves, regardless of what they result in, that we all feel. We sort of know it at our core. And this idea of, you almost, I thought you were like kind of going to go there, but you didn't. But the idea that I don't want to kill someone is not usually one that you're like, well, let me think about, like, maybe I should kill you. I calculated it. It's not right. That's not usually how we are on certain things. And then in other things, obviously, we do these calculations. And so your suggestion that you are violating something in pushing, well, there was a little bit of a violation with the pushing, but you certainly felt like you were violating something by killing, by being the surgeon who kills someone, removes their organs, and puts in someone else. And the pushing too. Usually, when people sort of work through this, they stumble upon this notion that they need to reconcile, which is that of rights, that I have certain rights. I have a right over my body. I have a right to freedom. I have a right to certain choices. And that you, even if it is true that in the grand scheme of things, the calculating engine of utilitarianism has decided that for my death, that needs to happen. I need to die. There is a violation there, I think, for many people. So we'll get into Kant and some more thought experiments and a couple of other really interesting things shortly. So is there anything, I think that's probably a good place for us to take a break, but are there any questions so far about what we're doing? Does everyone understand the process of iterating over these thought experiments, making a judgment, deriving a principle, challenging the principle with a variation on the thought experiment because we just keep finding ways that our judgments don't reconcile with our principles? This is what makes, if you walk around throughout the day, and just sort of going back to what I said earlier where I said everyone loves ethics, listen to your conversations that you have with people, listen to the conversations that people have on the train, at work, whatever it is. This is what we do as human beings. We sort of sit around and try to resolve cognitive dissonance. We say, I have this idea, and then I have this reality. Oh, hold on. Yes, I figured it out. Now this person's a bad person. That's fine. I thought it was a good person, but he didn't call me. Oh, now he's a bad person. Like, that's what we do constantly. And so part of, to me, what ethics, sort of the process that we're going through here is very natural, which is why there was no training. As soon as we started talking, hands went up, people started saying things, because that is human nature. We don't like to sit with cognitive dissonance. It's why if you were to take a work of fiction or a story and eliminate it's just facts. It's just the door was opened. The person walked out of it. The person got on a horse. The horse went to this town. He got off the horse. He said these words, but you couldn't really say, because the words would give meaning to things. So you couldn't really say that. If you sort of took all those things away, then life becomes totally uninteresting. It's the worst story. It's the worst movie you've ever been to, right, is one. And there's a reason why that House of Cards opened up with with this guy murdering a dog, where you go, well, I kind of understand it, but oh my God, you just murdered a dog with your bare hands. Because we love that. That's part of being human, is trying to figure out how to match our mental model of the world, wherever it comes from, whatever you are in a point of time, you understand the world a certain way, and you are constantly being challenged by that with everything that goes on. So the idea of resolving cognitive dissonance is very intuitive. Working through ethical problems in this particular way is a good way to avoid just yelling at people and trying to actually come up with something that can change your behavior and lead to better outcomes. It's interesting to see what kinds of things people agree on in different countries, and a lot of social experiments are done in different countries to see if those things come out. So far, because the thought experiments we've done eliminate the differences that you would tend to find across cultures for the most part. I mean, you have to know what a train is, I guess, but we're not relying on a lot. I would start to hit on a lot of those cultural differences if I took those thought experiments and started to overlay them with things that are different across cultures. So if I put people of different races, different economic classes, different genders on the tracks, you probably would find that if you were to ask people anonymously what they would do, or somehow put them into a simulation, their biases would start to come in. I have not seen, what is true is that the philosophy and the schools of ethics that we're dealing with here are limited to Western philosophical traditions, and there are other philosophical traditions that are non-Western. It's funny how many similarities there kind of are. So I'll give you just a quick example, and I know we have to take a break, I'm sorry, but we're not doing it today really, but there's a school of Stoicism. And there's a good example of a Stoic is some historical context. The Handbook of Epictetus is probably the oldest self-help book in the West that you can find. And basically, Epictetus was a slave, and he was in, I believe, Greece, and he was freed, and he was sort of educated at some point, and he had a very sort of benevolent master, and so he wrote this book. And it's very much comes out of that experience, because the Handbook of Epictetus is a book about Stoicism, which teaches you to detach. It basically says, hey, life is hard. The best thing for you to learn to do is to detach from your desires and your wants and your assumptions, and to just accept and to be at peace, right? And to try to say, the world is how it is, and I just need to accept that, right? So this is Stoicism, but it's also Buddhism. So completely different parts of the world. Someone stumbled upon this idea. When you really think about it, it makes a lot of sense in your certain situations, and then there's cognitive behavioral therapy and everything else. So there are lots of traditions that end up coming upon the same answers, and then there are cases where cultures deviate. But I don't think we're going to touch on anything today where, at least as far as I know, there's evidence where people in different cultures come to really different conclusions. But it's not only is that an issue in ethics, but there's also an issue in ethics, which I don't know if anyone has noticed, but these are all white old men who are telling us, like, hey, I don't know, this is how I think we should live. Obviously, there are a lot of other people who have different perspectives. And I hope we have some time for it at the end, but the feminist tradition now, feminist theory, has a lot to say, and there's a whole school of ethics called care ethics, which has come out of that, which has to say a lot, particularly around political philosophy, where if you get into political philosophy, you see that everyone, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, they all stop at the family. They go, yeah, equal rights and contract and fairness and all this stuff, and they go, until you're at home. And then you're the man. And that's it. And everyone just listens to you. And like, women are, I don't know, and kids, I don't know. But like, that's a different thing. That's called private space. That's not public space. So we don't deal with that. And yeah, if you're an old white guy who owns property, of course you don't care to deal with that. It works out pretty well for you. But feminists say, hey, hold on a second. We might actually have a lot to learn from what happens in families. And instead, there are sort of two feminist approaches. One is to say, let's take these traditions of equality, all these liberalist ideas, and bring them into the family. And some people say, well, hold on, like contract theory doesn't really make sense for my 5-year-old. I'm not going to sit down, we're not going to take a vote. It's not an egalitarian setup where we just say, all right, everyone, what do you think we should have tonight for dinner? It's like French fries for everyone, and all the kids vote, and that's it. That's what happens, because it's a democracy. So some people say we should bring those principles in. And care ethics sort of encourages the opposite, at least questions, or brings up this idea of, can we take what happens in a family, which is that we care for each other, we are interested in each other's well-being just because we are, and bring that out into the public space, which I think is a very encouraging and a very interesting idea, and far more optimistic than sort of this, Hobbes originally had this view in Leviathan. His view is that we are, it's a war of all against all, that like, unless we have government, we'll all just kill each other and take each other's stuff. Care ethicists say, no, actually, that's not what we would do. And evolutionary biologists also know that that's not actually what, if you believe in evolution, that's not what the other creatures that we came from actually do. They have social units and they care about each other. It is important that we understand Kant before we move on to the second theme. So utilitarianism is grounded in this idea of calculating pleasure and pain. And every utilitarian will, if you ever argue with a utilitarian in the spirit of constructive collaboration, then you will find or read about critiques of utilitarianism. Usually the counter argument is, well, I would just include that in the computation. So it's sort of like, well, I think that it's wrong to kill. And so the utilitarian would say, well, why is it wrong to kill? And so you'd come up with something, and then sort of similar to what we did before, you'd say, well, then I would take the cost of killing. If society would be awful if we all killed, then that should be part of the utilitarian calculus. So I try to stay clear to some degree of my personal opinions on this stuff, because I think it's important that everyone, but I can tell you that in my own experience, trying to walk around the world as a utilitarian is very self-satisfying and also kind of scary. Because it's this idea that you can create this machine where you put in all the input, and if anything goes wrong, someone just shows up and says, oh, but you didn't include this thing that I value, so just put that in. That doesn't help me so much, because that's a lot of work, that's a very complicated machine, and it turns out that I can just turn the knobs a little bit and get the answer that I want. This is not you won't find this in a lot of the formal arguments, because it's not a really strong ethical refutation. It's more of, okay, this is great in theory, and you might be totally right, but I need to walk around in the world and live. Like I don't have a computer. I mean, I have a computer, but I don't have my computer's not going to take into account everything, right? I can't get on the subway and start to account for the childhoods of every single person who's on the train and take that into account, and then the city that I'm in, and the privilege that I have. And, I would like to account for these things, but not in a way that I need to recalculate every time. I would like to just have a sense. I need rules. It turns out, as I walk around day to day, like basic rules, which is one of the appeals to something like, the Ten Commandments. It's pretty straightforward. And I'm not advocating that as a good philosophical or a good ethical argument, because it's not grounded on the things that philosophy is grounded on. It should be susceptible to reason, and a lot of religions aren't. But there is an alternative. So I mentioned earlier that Kant published the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals shortly after Bentham's principles of morality and legislation, and that many consider that to be a pretty serious counter-argument. And as I mentioned before, the problem is to some degree that it's hard to digest. So I'm going to try to give you at least some of the, I don't want to dwell on it for too long, because there are some very important things that I want to get to that are applicable for you on a day-to-day basis, so I want to get to that. But so first, let me be clear about something, because I've used this word a couple of times, I never bothered to define it. Deontological ethics. It comes from the word deon, which is Greek, I believe, for duty. So when you look at a utilitarian framework that says you have no duty, there's good and bad, and you calculate that, whatever. Deontological ethics are systems where the right and wrong decision is based on a set of rules, and that's it. The rules in and of themselves, we have decided, are the rules, and because they are in and of themselves good. This is a tricky thing, because it's hard to think about those rules and deontological sort of ethics without feeling like you're doing utilitarianism, without feeling like what we did before where we said, oh, I wouldn't kill someone, but the reason I wouldn't is because of, that you're, again, going back to calculating. And Kant would say, no, you don't kill someone because you don't kill someone, because. But he does offer a bit of evidence, but it's not calculating. It's not saying because things will be better or worse. He's saying because human beings have agency and dignity, and that a moral argument is not the result of a calculation. It is good in and of itself. So I can give you some of the arguments that he makes in his ethics. So very specifically, he says that morality is not about maximizing happiness. It's about respecting persons as an end in themselves. Now, one of the things you'll notice as I go through this, maybe some of you, you'll find that this actually resonates in your day-to-day life in a way that utilitarianism might or might not. And I encourage you to do one little thought experiment in your head as we go through this, which is to say, if you imagine yourself, well, I'll present the principles first. Sorry, I want you to have too much going on. He says that utilitarian happiness contributes, that principle contributes nothing whatever toward establishing morality, since making a man happy is quite different from making him good. And making him prudent or astute in seeking his advantage is quite different from making him virtuous. It only teaches us to become better at calculation. He has a very interesting definition of freedom, which at first, on the surface level, it seems like that deontological ethics is more restraining than a utilitarian one, because in the utilitarian one, like I said before, maybe clubbing baby seals is the best society we can have, and we should all do that. And utilitarianism is kind of open to that in a way that Kant really isn't. But his notion of freedom is actually quite different. And I find it, the more you think about it, the more it kind of chips away. This kind of how Kant is. When you first read Kant, you're like, this is nonsense, whatever. And then over the years, he really gets into you. This idea to Kant is that if you are doing this calculation of maximizing happiness, you're not free, actually, because you are a slave to that happiness. So all the things that you do all day long are just like, oh, I'm hungry. Well, I'm going to eat because it maximizes happiness. Oh, I care about money. Money makes me happy. I'm going to go do all the things that will maximize the money that I can possibly have. I don't, these other things don't matter as much, and I don't care about them, so I'm going to maximize that. And so it's back to this idea of what Hume said, where he said that reason is a slave to the passions, and Hobbes actually said something similar. Kant thinks it shouldn't be that way. Kant thinks you should not be trying to maximize your happiness. You should, if you are truly free, decide for yourself what it is that you want to seek out, not based on hunger, thirst, desires, appetites, happiness, joy, just real value. What is it to you that's me? And then override the passions that may come up and say, no, but don't you want to do this? This is fun. Like, let's go do this thing. And you go, no, that's not what I'm going to do because it's wrong. So for Kant, that's what it means to be free. He thinks that human beings have this unique thing that makes them human, which is their dignity and their agency, and that to honor that is to be free, because you can decide whatever you want, and then you are not a slave to those calculations. Does that make sense as like a basic? Okay. So he says that to act freely is to choose the end itself for its own sake. He has another interesting thing which will twist your mind around a little bit. He says that in order for an act to be morally good, it's not enough that it should conform to the moral law, it must also be done for the sake of moral law. So what does he mean by that? Well, let's say I do something really great. I donate a bunch of money. I open up an orphanage or charity or something like that. And I feel really good because it's on the news and all my friends think I'm a great person, and that's fantastic, right? Kant says, that's fine. That could be a good thing that you did. That's not saying that's a bad thing. But that is not a moral reason to do it. And that doesn't make the act moral, even if the results are things that we desire or that might end up making society better. This is where it kind of deviates from utilitarianism. Where utilitarianism says, I don't care what your motivations are. We have an orphanage now, great. You did the right thing. And Kant goes, right is about morality. You did it for your own reasons. That doesn't really make it moral. It might still be fine that you did it. He doesn't say that you shouldn't do it. And so and many of us, I touched on this earlier, that the idea that in business you should be ethical and you should make moral decisions because it leads to better business is entirely smacking in the face of what Kant says, right? Kant says absolutely not. That is not, he says nothing about business particularly, but there's nothing moral about running a business in a certain way that's good to people because it will lead to better business. The moral thing is to be good to people because they are people. That's his claim. He goes on. Actually, got a question over the break where, and this is something philosophers struggle with for a long time. We still want something sort of foundational. To say that something is good in and of itself, it seems very sort of up in the air. So he does give us something, what he calls a categorical imperative. A hypothetical imperative says, if you want X, do Y. A categorical imperative is a foundational statement that says, no, this is it. Everything should fit with this rule. This is a very basic rule that underlies all the other rules. And he believes that these are the same, but he gives us some examples or variations of them. So one is, act only on that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become universal law. This sounds very similar to do unto others as you would have done to yourself. And there's an important distinction. What you would have done unto yourself, actually, according to Kant, has nothing to do with it. So you might say, well, I don't know, I don't care if people take my winter clothes every summer because I buy new winter clothes. That doesn't mean you should go steal someone else's winter clothes, right? It's like, sorry, that's kind of a terrible example, but like there's this idea that do unto others as you would do unto you opens itself up to this idea that it depends on what your preferences are, which then goes towards a sort of a utilitarian argument. And Kant says no. It's not that. It's you have to think about what you do and examine whether you can universalize it for everyone. That is part of what makes it moral. That is a little open to a utilitarian description. There's another variation which I think might be easier to think about, which is, excuse me, act in such a way that you will always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. Don't treat people as a means. People in and of themselves have value, in and of themselves. Their well-being should matter to you. This idea that you should not treat people as an end is, if we think about the things we went through before, and if we think about human rights and some of these other Western variations on this, I think if you really start, at least for me, it does resonate. It goes, pushing the fat man off the bridge is using him as an object. It is a dehumanizing act in and of itself. And to Kant, that is the violation. That's different from, there's actually a variation of the trolley problem, and I don't want to get into it because we should get into other things, but there's a variation of the trolley problem where instead of two tracks, you have a track, you have a side track that reattaches to the track and hits the 5 people, and on the side track is the 1 person, and the idea is that you're using the 1 person to stop the train from then going on and hitting the 5 people, even though you're not pushing them. And that variation, you can think about it on your own, but for some people that touches on this idea of now I'm using another human being to stop a train rather than just deviating a train into a different direction that ends up having some kind of consequence that's better or worse. This idea of using people is something that I think is intuitive to all of us. None of us want to be used. If you talk to people about your personal relationships or your professional relationships, things that feel that way feel wrong. And that's what Kant sort of gets to. And so a big thing here that in the beginning we were evading is that the reason you do something to Kant matters, really, really matters. We, in the beginning, were talking about killing the 5 and the 1, and I think someone was saying, it's like all the same, it's all the same. It ends up with the same number of deaths or whatever it is. And Kant would go, it's actually, that has nothing to do with it. What has everything to do with the moral law is the act itself. Whether the act was, did you violate someone's dignity? Did you violate their sort of humanity in the process of achieving a result? That might have been totally the same as some other hypothetical where you didn't do that, and you still got the same result. That matters to him. So that's Kant, you could spend years on Kant, but that's a good start. There are some consequences to Kant which will stop you from fully adopting him probably in your life, for most of you. For instance, the notion that you cannot use someone as a means presents a problem for casual sex. And in fact, I believe he also was against masturbation because he believed that it violated, it is using your body as a means to satisfy an urge, as a tool to sort of to feed a hunger of some sort that's not necessary. Now, I'm not defending that necessarily, but there's also actually one of the people does a lot of that stuff's not actually in philosophical texts, but there are other arguments. For example, the famous one is he says you shouldn't lie. That's part not using people as a means. When you lie to someone, according to Kant, you are using them as a means to achieve something. You're lying for your own purpose. Otherwise, you wouldn't lie. There's some reason you're lying. And even if you're lying for their sake, very often you're lying for their sake because you want to feel better about what it is that they're doing or what it is that you're telling them. But the classic example is you're hiding people. In the papers, it's you're hiding Jews and Nazis show up at your door and they knock on the door and they go, are there any Jews here? And the argument against Kant's thing of like never lie is clearly there are situations where most of us would lie. I think I've read some modern accounts that let Kant off the hook in this by saying, well, the reason that you don't lie, again, tying back to motive. The reason that you do lie is because you are saving people who are innocent, which is respecting their humanity, their agency, their dignity, and all these other things. Viewed from a perspective of human rights, I think all of us are far more comfortable probably with applying principles from like sort of Kantian principles to our day-to-day life. But I don't know that I answered your question fully. Ultimately, these are the categorical imperative of these two things, of not using people as a means to an end, and that what you do should be universalizable. You can argue against them. You can try to say that those aren't good categorical imperatives. Kant spends a lot of time trying to make the case that those are grounded in a certain respect for these attributes that are uniquely human. And don't fall into the trap when you think about this of thinking, well, anytime I think about the consequences of something, I'm being a utilitarian. That's not true. You're being a utilitarian when you start adding things up and deciding that what is good and what is bad is just whatever is the greatest sum. You might decide that Kant is right, but it does not lead to the greatest happiness. And you might still agree with it, right? That's a way in which you can think about consequences, but not be a utilitarian or a consequentialist, ethically speaking. Obviously, when we think about things, we think about the consequences of those things. It's a little hard to do. Sometimes I get tripped up in my head where I'm like, wait, am I being a utilitarian when I'm thinking about Kant? I don't know. When we started this, I asked the question of sort of I think the way everyone thought about it is what you should do with the trolley problem, right? What's the right thing? I said both in the beginning, and I wish I hadn't, because I don't know which seed I planted in your head, but there's another question of what you would do. And what you would do and what you should do are two very different things, very often. And that's where I think I start to get away from these texts that are, you're sitting down and you're calm and you're thinking things through in hypothetical experiments, and get more into what's it like walking around day to day trying to do these things, and how is it that I can take these ideas that I agree with and then use them in a world where I kind of feel a little bit out of control, in the sense that I'm not calmly sitting thinking about things. I have all of these other things that are going on. I'm tired, I'm upset, I'm resentful about something, I'm exhausted, I don't know, whatever it is going on. Or I'm happy, or I just got promoted, so now I'm the best person in the world. I'm such a great, wonderful, generous person, right? Everyone on the way to work gets money when I get promoted. So these things feel like, I don't like it. I don't like that. Some days I'm better than others. I would prefer to sort of be grounded. So it turns out there are experiments that try to do this. This is where you can get a little more empirical. All this other stuff is just, what's the right thing to do? What people do, for example, There are two experiments in particular that I want to talk about. I think I'll stick with this one because it's kind of the most horrifying. So is anyone here familiar with the Milgram experiment? It's a pretty famous experiment. Yeah, a lot of people in the room. So the Milgram experiment, it's a real experiment, and essentially what they did, this was in Yale, early 60s, Stanley Milgram. I don't think you can do these experiments anymore. I think they're too unethical. But you know, so there's an ethical question about whether it's okay for me to use an unethical experiment in a class on ethics, but we'll leave that aside. So the experiment is simply this: they bring someone into the room, and there's there are three people. There's a person who's sort of running the experiment, and then another person who's pretending to be a volunteer but isn't, and then a real volunteer. And they say to the real volunteer, you know, they pretend to that they kind of draw straws. They randomly pick, and one person is going to be the subject, and the learner, and the other person is going to be the teacher. And the learner is to go into the other room. And the way it's always set up is the tickets just say that on both of them they say the same thing. The person who's faking, the fake collaborator, just pretends that he's the learner, so that he goes into the room where the learner is supposed to go. The actual volunteer is told that this is a learning experiment about sort of memorization. And what they are trying to do is to see if they can induce learning by sort of using punishment. So they take both of them into a room, and they take the fake volunteer and sit him down, and they attach a device to him that can electrocute him. And they explain the experiment. The idea is just that there are there's a list of words, pairs of words, and the job of the learner is to memorize the words. And the job of the teacher is to punish the learner by electrocuting him every time he gets it wrong. So that's how it's set up. So they put this person, the actual volunteer sees all this he sees a person get hooked up. They take him into the other room. They give him a little sample shock. They go, this is what 45 volts feels like. So he gets shocked. He says, okay. And they sit him down in front of this console in the other room that he's told connects to the room and is wired up to the other person. And the console is just switches, like 3 dozen up-down switches on this console labeled, I don't know what the bottom is, let's say 15 volts, all the way up to 450 volts. And the idea is that you flip, every time the participant in the other room gets something wrong, this volunteer is to flip the next switch, increasingly electrocuting the person in the other room, right? Now, it turns out obviously they're not electrocuting anyone. What they do is they fake it, and then they have the person in the other room, as this experiment goes on and the voltage goes up, they have recordings. And the recordings play at the increasing voltage levels. And the recordings are horrifying, because as the person is getting electrocuted, they start to say, no. They start to say, let me out of here. They say, I have a heart condition. They say, I don't want to do this anymore. And the question, the volunteer thinks this is about learning. It's not about learning. It's about obedience. This whole experiment is to see to what degree people, normal, everyday, educated people, this was at Yale, will go through and electrocute someone just because it's part of the structure, right? And this was on the heels of Eichmann's capture and sort of a lot of debate about sort of the banality of evil and everything that went on in Nazi Germany, and the idea of how all of these people collaborated. How did this happen? So that was the experiment. Now, my question to you is, what percentage of people do you think went all the way up? Now, the labels are, shock. The numbers are there, but they're also labeled mild, high, dangerous, really dangerous, XXX, like do not do this. What percentage do you think went all the way up to 450 volts? While in the course of doing that, hearing the person scream, hearing the person say, I want out of here, anytime they sort of said they didn't want to do it, the person in the lab coat behind them would just say, the experiment requires that you continue. Like just these mild prompts, nothing threatening, nothing scary, just very cold, like, well, this is the experiment, that kind of a thing. What percentage of people do you think electrocuted went all the way up, 450 volts?
10%.
Okay, anyone else? 65%. So 1962, 63. There were a series of these that were actually done where they did different things. They would put the person in the same room, in a different room, whatever, but this is the basic structure of the experiment. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I am sure that no one thought they would do this. If I had a thought experiment with these people before they went in, I said, hey, here's a thought experiment. You're going to go into this thing, you're going to get paid $50 to be part of this experiment at a university, and you're going to electrocute someone at 450 volts. You think, is that what you're going to do? And everyone would probably say, no, why would I do that? I'm not even I could just leave. Why would I do that? I want you to hear, and if this shouldn't, I don't know, it's hard to say. If anyone gets really uncomfortable, just raise your hand and I'll turn it off. But there's actual recordings of the sessions. Now, just keep in mind, no one's actually being electrocuted. This is all fake. But I want you to see what this was sort of like. Hopefully this will stimulate some sort of emotional response. So this is a person, it's sort of in the middle of one of these.
Wrong. Answer is bare. 240 volts. Next one, sweet. No, you go back up to the beginning of that page and go through it again until you've learned them all correctly. Oh, no, I'm not going to do like that. You mean I got to keep going up with the scale? No, sir, he's already there. I'm not going to give him 450 volts. The experiment requires it. I know it does, but that man is hollering in there, sir. As I said before, although the shocks may be painful, they're not dangerous. He's yelling in there. Start with blue, please, at the top of the page. Continue, please, teacher. Well, I thought we're going over it again. No, just go ahead. Blue, boy, girl, grass, hat. Correct. Nice. Day, sky, job, chair. Wrong. Answer is day. 285 volts. Continue, please. Facts. Man, lady, tub, neck. Answer, please. Wrong. Answer is neck. 300 volts.
I absolutely refuse to answer anymore. Get me out of here. You can't hold me here. Get me out. Get me out of here.
Continue. The next word is green, please. Green. Grass, hat, ink, apple. If the learner doesn't answer in a reasonable time, about 4 or 5 seconds, consider the answer wrong and follow the same procedures you have been doing for wrong answers. Say wrong, tell them the number of votes, give them the punishment, read them the correct answer. Oh, man. Continue, please. Green. Grass, hat, ink, apple. Answer, please. Go on with the procedure, please, teacher. 315 volts. The answer is ink.
Okay. Are you uncomfortable? Did I make you uncomfortable? I promised I would. Are we getting there? I'm uncomfortable. That's horrifying. Now, the person in the video is actually really uncomfortable. Now, it's interesting to watch what's going on. Notice what did you make out like that he was like the guy's hollering in there like I don't want to do this, and the lab coat is just like, yeah, it requires that you continue, right? Notice what the person didn't do. I'm gonna actually play another clip which is of someone who does stop, because my really the important question for me is what differentiates a person who stops from the person who doesn't. I want to understand that for myself. And so it's interesting to see what they say. So we'll do another one here.
Hard head. Just how far can you go in this thing? As far as is necessary. What do you mean as far as is necessary? I sure don't know the effect of this thing, and I'm a little skeptical about electricity. The experiment requires it to go on, teacher. Please continue. Incorrect. 150 volts.
Oh,
Sad
wait a
face.
minute. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
I think we have to find out what's wrong in there first. The experiment requires that you continue, teacher. Well, the experiment might require that we continue, but I still think we should find out what the condition of the gentleman is. Now, as I said before, although the shocks may be painful, they're not dangerous. Look, I don't know anything about electricity. I don't profess any knowledge, nor will I go any further until I find out if you guys are okay. It's absolutely essential that you continue. Well, essential or not, this program isn't quite that important to me that I should go along doing something that I know nothing about, particularly if it's going to injure someone. I don't know what this is all about. Well, whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word pairs correctly. Well, you can sure have your 450 back. I didn't want it anyhow. I intend to give it to some charitable organization, but I wouldn't go on with it. The 450 is not the issue here. That check is yours simply to the lab. It is essential that you continue the experiment. No, it isn't essential. Not one bit. You have no other choice, teacher. Oh, I have a lot of choices. My number one choice is that I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed.
I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed. So I'm looking, as I'm listening to these, right, and I'm trying to find something that I can relate to the things that we've talked about before. Now I don't want to waste too much time. Some of these take a little while to listen to, but there's another clip of a gentleman who also stops, refuses to go on, and he says, "I wouldn't want to be getting that every time I got the wrong answer. I'm not going to hurt the guy." And another guy at the end, who's actually kind of my favorite, he's like, he also refuses to go on after a certain point, and he gets quite heated, and he goes, I have to continue to hurt another human being? I don't believe in it. Flat. The guy that we heard first, who went on, he protested. He was uncomfortable, and he was aware of his discomfort, but he continued. And what was missing, and we didn't hear we had to wait for this guy to actually get to the point that I thought was interesting, where he said, I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed, because what I think, in my view, the things that get people to stop in many of these situations aren't utilitarian principles, at least it seems to me, right? They don't say, I mean, they sort of start that way. I don't know about electricity, if he's really getting hurt, not getting hurt, maybe, I don't know, this and that, and then they just go, I'm not hurt, I'm not doing it. I wouldn't hurt another person. And so this is, I wanted to bring this up because and let's sort of leave this aside for a second, but when you think about someone, even in pop culture, or someone that you know that we consider, that we hold in sort of high moral regard, right? Are they utilitarians? Are they Kantians? Is Superman a utilitarian? He's a pretty good guy. You ever see him going, well, does he ever kill anyone? I don't think he ever kills anyone, right? There's I think it was Cynthia Carroll. There was a recent Ivy event where they talked about the CEO of, what's the South African mining company? I don't know, maybe some of you went to this event. And there was a big thing about her, which was that she was in charge of this company, and there were mining deaths, and she just stopped. This is the most profitable mining company in South Africa, and she just said, I'm not doing this. And the quote from her is, I will not be the chief executive of a company where year after year people die on our watch. Is that a utilitarian position? But one of the things that was interesting to me was I sort of struggle with this, and I'm like, am I utilitarian? Am I Kantian? I don't know. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. And then I started to wonder, what would I want my parent to be? What would I want my spouse to be? Would you, if you know, think about, you've got your spouse, someone who's really important to you, whose ethics really matter to you, and they go, yeah, I was walking across this bridge today, and this train, you won't believe what happened. This train was going by. There was this fat man, though. And so I just like, it's kind of crazy, but I saved like 5 people on the way to work. Because I just pushed this guy off. Like, how would you feel? Seriously. You'd be like, what? No, like, we're not, that doesn't feel right. That's Kant, that's it. Like, there's a reason, and I know that it's emotionally based, but I think there is also something else that's underlying it. And so I think that's actually very interesting to me, and I think it comes from this idea that in our minds, we're all good people. So we are not threatened by a utilitarian calculus because we know that we don't really mean any harm to anyone anyway. We're not really going to do anything that's that bad, but we're going to calculate this thing out anyway, and I don't know, maybe. But when we are dealing with each other, actually, those risks are much greater. And I don't ever want to know that someone who's really important to me or whom I trust with whatever it is, my well-being, my finances, is going to wake up one day and go, hey, I ran my utilitarian machine this morning, and actually your interests don't align with mine anymore. I'm going to do something else. There's one other, I do want to mention Aristotle quickly, and then we can wrap up. Because Aristotle, and this goes back to a question from way in the beginning. Aristotle, the oldest of all the philosophers, I think really touched on, so Aristotle's ethics that's called virtue ethics, and his idea is, in his time, philosophy encompassed everything, right? It was natural science, it was how to live a good life. So today, philosophers don't do this stuff anymore in that way. They've narrowed, and ethicists have narrowed what they talk about. But Aristotle was very concerned about the habits as part of his ethics. So how do you live a virtuous life was his question. So it's sort of like half psychology, half ethics. But the reason there's this sort of resurgence in it now is because he takes into account something that almost all of us have overlooked, but is why I was troubled with the elevator situation earlier today. And maybe the rest of you were like, who cares about this elevator situation? And it goes back, and it's in part related to this. Aristotle said that the way to be a virtuous person is to practice being a virtuous person the same way that being a flute player is to practice the flute. That's how you become good at that. You don't just say, oh, I know what the virtuous principles are, and then wait until it's Nazi Germany, or wait until you're the CEO of a company, and then say, oh, I'm going to do the right thing now. Odds are you won't. And that really does resonate for me. So the reason that I care about the elevator is not because I think the elevator situation, the line downstairs really matters, but because it's an opportunity to practice. It's an opportunity to have awareness about what's going on, to try to put myself in your shoes, which, incidentally, there are quite a few experiments where people behave differently. I said this earlier, if they just take a minute to think about things from another person's perspective and write it down. And Aristotle would really like that. Aristotle would say that's the right thing to do. You really do need to go through life, if you want to be a virtuous person, practicing virtue. And I think, when I see, we just talked about this the other night, but the bank, Wells Fargo, right? This whole thing happened, and he just sat there, and they were firing. And you looked at him, and you're like, there's something missing, and then he got fired or quit, whatever it was. But there's something that I think when you go through life not practicing this, it's very hard to suddenly practice it. In particular when the stakes are high, right? If you can't decide, hey, I should think about this totally meaningless ethical situation about whether I get on the train or not, or whether I cut in line or not, or whatever it is, then when I really care, when it's my financial security or the performance of my company, or when I'm drunk, or when I'm upset, or when I'm aroused, or all of these passions are really influencing me, am I suddenly going to be able to do this? And I think no, personally. Or I'd be very surprised. So that's a very personal take on this. But it is you, going back to the metaphor from the beginning, it's when reason sits on your shoulder, it is practicing engaging with reason in a way so that it's not new to you when it happens. The greatest thing that I could say in terms of what will affect your day-to-day is there's actually something this is also a very personal thing I did, but anyone here familiar with David Foster Wallace's commencement speech? This is Water. It's related to this because he very specifically tries to attack this idea that you know what truth is, that Your reality is just the story you happen to tell yourself about the things that are going on in the world. I found that I used to listen to you need to listen to the full one, by the way. There's an abridged one, but you should listen to the full one. And it's like 20 minutes, you can listen to it. I used to listen to it in the morning. And it's one thing I did that really made me very aware of how I was going through the day, assuming things about people and their motivations and the stories and why is this happening, and this is so annoying, and this person's in front of me, and this person said they were gonna email and they never did. Like all of these things and my stories around them, I started to be a lot more empathetic, and then I started to try to at least open up to this idea that someone else's narrative is really their truth. They're not just idiots. It is their truth, and there's a good reason for it. Reason is not about right, it's about logic. There is a logic behind things, and actually touching on the election, I think a couple of weeks before the actual election, I started to befriend random, because I had not really a lot of people in my feed who were Trump supporters, but I would notice them yelling at my friends on their feeds, and I started to just friend request them randomly because I was kind of interested in engaging with them to see, I don't know, I'm like a glutton for punishment maybe, I don't know what it is, but I did, and it was interesting because it made me angry at first, and then I started to sort of try hard to open up to this idea that they have a narrative that is grounded in something that may not be at its core awful. That is, I certainly do not agree with the immigration policies that Trump puts forth. But if you really, in a collaborative way, start to talk to someone who is worried about immigration, you might come to a principle that you agree on. You'll just probably disagree on the solution, and you might suspect that the motivations are different for both of you, but you won't know unless you really start to ask those questions. And so what I started to do was, so I befriended them, and then I started to just ask a lot of questions. Like someone would say something that I just thought was so awful, and then I'd say, oh, but why? Like, tell me more. You know, they'd be, I don't know, like Hillary kills babies. And I'd be like, oh, really? Can you tell me more about that? And I don't know, sometimes they'd post an article that was fake, or sometimes they would be like, no, that's not, I heard this thing, and it's not exactly what I meant, and this and that. So the idea is just to be open to other people's narratives and to try to put yourself in their shoes. And when you do that, you are collaboratively working on trying to come to a narrative that you can share. And there is no truth. There's just the narrative that you have in your head. And when that narrative is shared, we all really do much better. Or at least when we share the motivations for that narrative. I have a favor to ask, which would make me very happy. I don't know how to do this. I guess I'll send you all my email address through the list. But it would make me so happy if it could be a day from now, a week from now, whatever it is. If you have a moment where you think about something happens, I don't care if it's the subway, it's at work, it's a friend, whatever it is, you find yourself in a dilemma and you think about things just a little differently because of the experience you've had here today, and you're willing to share that with me in some way, I would love to hear about it. That would make me very happy. Thank you all. This was a really huge pleasure for me.